Hey, welcome back, YouTube. This is Nathan Daley, and I'm your law enforcement translator here to provide insight on current event topics and issues in this country. Guys, I have a great discussion for you today. Listen, this is May 25th. This is the anniversary of George Floyd's passing. And what an interesting time to pass some executive orders. Joe Biden has done something that he probably should have done a long time ago in reference to the George Floyd Policing Act. I'm curious to know what you guys think. You guys, what did he sign? Today, some very unique piece of executive order in reference to policing accountability. I think it's interesting. I'm going to play a news clip. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on it. But let's pull up a news article real quick so we can go through this before we play this video, because I want to break down this entire event and really point out some of the key things that I'm concerned about once you get my perspective on it. This is going to be a very interesting piece of legislation. So this is an executive order. It creates a national registry of officers fired for misconduct and encourages state and local police to tighten restrictions on chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and restrictions on military equipment that are transferred to agencies from the military. Now, I'm going to give you my thoughts on this, and I think it's going to be interesting. I'm also tell you some things that he's missing. I'm gonna give you a little bit of ideas that I have that should be implemented. We need to take this thing a step further in order to rebuild the relationship and the trust. Before we go into that, I'm gonna play the clip. I'm gonna stop and pause it and give you my thoughts on it. Let's go. We gotta listen to your girl though. All right. Kamala's talking first. Listen, we just got to suffer through it.
Not under these circumstances, but it is good to be with you. And I know, of course, that today, following yesterday, that all of our hearts, of course, are with the people of Uvalde, Texas, with the parents, with the children, with all the folks who said goodbye yesterday morning to someone they loved, not knowing that that goodbye would be their last. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. As the president said last night, we must...
Now, let me pause it. When people make this statement about enough is enough, you guys, there's nothing you can do, right? Enough is enough doesn't change anything. People hate the talking points. They hate the rhetoric. Enough is enough, you guys. We need to come to, all that stuff. It's old. It's old. People don't want to hear that. They need a different tune. They need something different that actually works. The truth, first and foremost, is that there's nothing you can do to protect anybody from these lunatics, these evil, wicked people from carrying out these acts of violence. We need to start telling people to prepare themselves. We need to start educating people on how to properly use these weapons, put policing in the right places so that they can actually have the proper impact.
Must have the courage to stand up to the gun lobby and pass reasonable gun safety laws. We must work together.
All right, let me pause it. Gun safety laws. What does gun safety laws have to do with a psychopath hell-bent on creating mayhem, murder, mischief, evil acts and deeds? What does gun safety laws have to do with any of that? Absolutely nothing, you guys. Let's just be honest. I'm telling you, as someone who's done this job for a very long time, criminals don't care about laws. That's what makes them criminals. There's no laws you can create that'll magically, this is not a fairy tale, right? No law that you put on books will have an impact significant enough to actually see a substantial decrease in mass shootings, gun-related deaths, gun-related suicides. This country is too far gone. It is what it is. Unless you stop the manufacturers themselves from producing weapons, listen, it is what it is. It absolutely is what it is. There's no such thing as gun safety laws. It's not going to change anything. What's in place is in place, right? So let's be real about that. So this is, a lot of people don't like this rhetoric. It's very old. It's played out, and it's pointless. And it doesn't even act as a Band-Aid as it used to. The reality is you can't change the mind of an evil person. When they decide to commit acts of violence on someone, that's exactly what they'll do. And they will absolutely bypassed every single law you thought was relevant. That's what makes them criminals. So miss me with all this, Kamala.
Together to create an America where everyone feels safe in their community, where children feel safe in their schools. And of course, that responsibility that we collected.
First of all, you want kids to feel safe. Spend the money necessary to secure the school properly so that strangers can't walk through back doors. Where's the controlled access? You know, the issue is you guys don't want to spend the money. These states don't want to spend the money that's necessary to secure the school properly. This is an elementary school. No one should have been able to open a door and enter the school. You have so many people, innocent people who are inside that school that need to be protected properly. No excuse. Period. Let's call it what it is. How many of these schools and these areas and these different communities have controlled access? How many? How much would it cost to actually implement? Are you willing to fit the bill? I don't know, because your boy right there next to you, he just threw $40 billion overseas. So again, while we're talking about security of this country and the security funds are being shipped overseas to countries that have nothing to do with this country, again, you sound like a clown. You sound like a clown. And I think people are just tired. They're tired. When are we going to start investing money into this country, into the people who live here, into the citizens properly? Now, if we take care of our business and we got a little left over, okay, by all means, help people out. Again, it's not your job as a country to be the savior of other countries. So we got United Nations for, right? So all this talk right here sounds like a bunch of foolishness and BS, but I'm not surprised. Are you surprised? What are you guys' thoughts? Do we not have the money? We got the money. We don't want to spend it where it needs to be spent at. Meanwhile, the military has a $700 billion budget that they spend, approximately every year, and they can't offer $1 billion here and there to protect the people in this country. Again, what is the government's job? Right? It's the government's job. Anyways.
Actively have to ensure that all people feel safe in their community is what brings us together today. It is an honor to be joined by the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. And I have met many of you before.
Now, please be mindful what you say about Breonna Taylor. The fact that her family's there, she's looking at the federal government as her daughter was killed unlawfully, and the officers who were involved were not held accountable for her death. And so again, I don't like all this using names to try to make yourself seem or come off like you have empathy, because you don't. We're just using these names because we think it makes us look better than we are. In actuality, it makes you look horrible. So very disappointed already. We're already only like 2 minutes into this statement. Jesus Christ. She's a nightmare.
And many times. And many others I am meeting for the first time. I am moved, as always, by your courage. You have felt so much pain, and you have endured unimaginable grief. You have experienced the anguish of losing someone you love and cherish. And yet, you are here, as you have been throughout the days of your grief, standing selflessly, full of grace and resilience, to speak up, to speak out, often against odds, great odds, to fight for a world where no one has to experience what you have been through. Your loved ones should be with us today. You should not have to mourn. You should never have had to mourn in order for our nation to feel your pain and to understand what is wrong and to agree that something must be done. I know it is a particularly difficult day for the Floyd family. 2 years ago today, a brother, a son, a father was taken from you. We will never forget what happened that day. The eyes of the world, literally, were on what happened that day. The law enforcement officers of our nation, well, they swear an oath to protect and to serve. And the vast majority do so honorably. Yet we know, too often, when there is a use of biased policing and excessive force, when that occurs, it too often is not met with accountability. Denying equal justice.
What she said, I would say, is accurate. And I think it's accurate, but there are some nuances to it. I think we have to get to a point to where we're actually educating the citizens on use of force, educating them on the law, and explaining why certain cases where officers do something, though you see it on body camera, you see the video of it, it does not look appealing. No use of force application is going to look attractive, right? And so I think it's important that we educate our citizens on what to expect and understanding what's being done. And yes, there are times where officers use excessive force. I'm not referring to that. I think sometimes the use of force itself does not look appealing. And a lot of times, though it may look awful, it does not mean it's not lawful. And I think we have to be mindful of that, because sometimes we're looking at things from the lens of our moral spectrum and not from the legal spectrum. And so to her point, I do agree with it. When there are officers who have broken the law, have used excessive force, or they've abused their power and authority, there are some officers who have gotten away with that and not been held accountable. And so this is important. I think this is a very, very key issue that needs to be addressed and needs to be handled strategically and appropriately in order for us to rebuild this thing properly. So that I do agree with. And how it gets done is the key. And a lot of times, a lot of these politicians, because they have no experience in law enforcement, or they're getting advice from people who don't have the best interest of both sides, they don't come up with good policies or ideas on how to fix the problem, which is the issue. And this is why nothing really gets solved, right? So you need someone like myself, or someone else who thinks like myself, whoever could provide some really, really good feedback, things that are actually practical and are taking consideration the root issues, not the surface issues. The surface issues is what everybody wants to put a Band-Aid on, yet this problem requires surgery. And if you don't have hands of a surgeon, then you're only going to make matters worse, right?
Justice, not just to individuals, but to whole communities, and therefore to our nation as a whole. Trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve is critical to ensuring public safety. And as many of you know, this is an issue I have worked on personally since my first days as an elected district attorney,
and the word on the street is that you did a horrible job at it. But I digress.
As California's Attorney General. As a United States Senator, I, together with Senator Cory Book, Congresswoman Karen Bass, introduced legislation to advance much-needed reforms. That legislation would have ensured greater transparency and increased accountability. We later named it the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And it was passed because of the strength of the leadership in the House of Representatives through the House of Representatives. However, last fall, Senate Republicans rejected the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They walked away from their moral obligation to address what caused millions of Americans to march in the streets. The critical need that a coalition of Americans were demanding,
She tries way too hard to give a speech. You know, normally you see that with people who are just absolutely not genuine. But what is she saying about the George Floyd Policing Act? To be honest with you guys, from what I've seen in that policy, yes, those things were nice to have, but they would not have fixed any of the problems, right? They would not have fixed the problem. I think what people get disappointed in is that when you start to put so much emphasis on an idea that you have and you tell people that this is the answer or this is a great answer, and then it's applied and then you're not getting the results that you expected because you hyped it up. The George Floyd Policing Act was overhyped. It was overhyped. It spoke to none of the real core root issues that are having the biggest impact and problems within the communities, especially within the Black community. And then again, nationwide, police problem is a nationwide problem, and it did not address the nationwide issue. It addressed a few things that were important and relevant, I believe, but there are so much more relevant things that were missing. The George Floyd Policing Act is that of a Band-Aid, and again, this thing requires surgery. And so, you know, to my point, what is she doing? She's trying to invoke an emotional response out of everybody saying that, hey, it's not our fault why it didn't get passed. We wrote it up and so forth and so on. But again, you know, real reform needs to happen on a state level, you guys. To be completely honest with you, there's 18,000 police departments. The federal government doesn't have the arm strength to actually fix the problem. It needs to be fixed on a state level, just FYI. So this is why all this stuff they're talking, it just sounds silly to me, to be honest. We need to start by, first and foremost, body cam requirements, and then disciplinary actions and criminal action for those who don't use them or have them on when incidents do happen. I think that's a good start.
Pleading for in terms of reform and accountability. At the time, President Joe Biden and I, and all of us here, we made clear, and we vowed that we would explore every action available to us at the executive level to advance the cause of justice in our nation. In a moment, our president will sign an executive order that takes dozens of important actions to advance effective, accountable policing, to strengthen trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, and to help us fight crime and promote public safety. This order will help protect our communities, and it will help keep members of law enforcement safe on the job. These actions are a result of input and collaboration from a broad set of partners, many of whom are here today: civil rights leaders, members of Congress, in particular members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I see Madam Chair here with us today, leading law enforcement groups, and of course the families of the victims. We know this executive order will not take away your pain, and the pain of all those families who may not be in this room right now. We also know this executive order is no substitute for legislation, nor does it accomplish everything we know must be done. But it is a necessary and long overdue.
What I don't like about politicians is that now we're in a position where you want to do something after something has already happened. Whereas you've had plenty of time to actually execute something similar to this over the last 2 years. Why? Why is it that now you want to show face, right? You want to show that you can do something after such a tragedy like this has, fallen on the people? The problem with this is it's almost as if they're like, hey, let's hold on to this just in case something happens and we can act like we're doing something. It's a joke. It's a game to them. It's a game. You talk about a presidency that ran on criminal justice reform, equitable treatment and racism and fixing the racist problem in the country, blah, 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 blah. And, what are you going to do? Some people are talking about the African American hate crime bill, everybody got one, but black folks got one, don't have one. And so, things like this, why does it take so long? You have the power of the pen to actually write things. Write an executive order. It doesn't kill you to do it. So, I don't know, a lot of rhetoric, more propaganda. It sounds good. It soothes people's ears.
Critical step forward. And once again, the President and I call on the United States Senate to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And once again, we vow that we will do everything in our power to protect public safety, to support law enforcement, and to address this issue of racial injustice wherever it exists. And with that, it is now my great honor to introduce a man who, when he ran for president, was clear in his purpose, which was to bring our nation together, who fights every day to make sure all our communities are safe and that the rights of all people are protected. The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Ben Crump in the front.
Thank you all.
That brother's omnipresent.
Harris, before we begin, let me say a few words about what happened in Uvalde, Texas, elementary, and ensures that gun laws are enforced and the Second Amendment is abided by. Manufacturer, 18-year-old can walk into a store. You couldn't own a cannon. You couldn't own certain kinds of weapons. It's just always been limitations. But guess what? These actions we've taken before, they saved lives. And they can do it again. The idea that an 18-year-old can walk into a store and buy weapons of war designed and marketed to kill is, I think, just wrong. It just violates common sense. Even the manufacturer, the inventor of that weapon, thought that as well. Where's the backbone? Where's the courage to stand up to a very powerful lobby? That's why the executive order I'll be signing today is so important in my view. It's a measure of what we can do together to heal the very soul of this nation, to address profound fear and trauma, exhaustion, that particularly Black Americans have experienced for generations, and to channel that private pain and public outrage into a rare mark of progress for years to come. 2 summers ago, in the middle of the pandemic, we saw protests across the nation, the likes of which you hadn't seen since the 1960s. They unified people of every race and generation. Athletes and sports leagues boycotted and postponed games. Companies and workers proclaimed Black Lives Matter. Students staged solidarity walkouts. From Europe to the Middle East to Asia to Australia, people saw their own fight for justice and equality, what we were trying to do.
And what was the result of that? What did we get from that? What was the result of that? Legislation that you should have, this country should have passed a long time ago, should have been passed, right? You're just now, how embarrassing is you're talking about something that you should have already taken care of. This actually doesn't look good on you, right? It doesn't. After all of that, the George Floyd Policing Act didn't even get passed like it was supposed to. And the organization has a whopping $90 million that's unaccounted for. Well, technically, about $70 million are unaccounted for. It's embarrassing. The whole Black Lives Matter movement was a sham. But some people saw it.
The message is clear. Enough. Just enough. Look, almost a year later. almost a year late. So I'm asked why I haven't done this executive order earlier. If I'd done it, I was worried it would undercut the effort to get the law passed. This is a call to action based on a basic truth. Public trust, as any cop will tell you, is the foundation of public safety. If they're not trusted, the population doesn't contribute, doesn't cooperate. Two sides of the same coin, inextricably linked.
He's absolutely correct. No trust, no work, right? We can't do this job without the public's trust. And without the public's trust, the police officers aren't going to be good at their job, right? It makes everything more difficult. More reasons why we need great reform policy, legit reform policy, and policy that's actually going to work. Also, we also need reform throughout government, right? Let's be real. Government has an issue all the way to the top. So it doesn't stop with police officers, right? We're talking about government trust in general is absent, and for right reasons.
And the principles of fairness and equal justice are at the core of each of them. For the wheels of justice are propelled by the confidence that people have in their system of justice. Police are put in greater danger. Justice goes undelivered. Without public trust, law enforcement can't do its job of serving and protecting all of our communities. But as we've seen all too often, public trust is frayed and broken, and that undermines public safety. For the families here today and across the country who've had to ask why this nation, why so many black Americans wake up knowing they could lose their life in the course of just living their life today. Simply jogging, shopping, sleeping at home. Whether they made headlines or not, lost souls gone too soon.
What black person was killed sleeping in their home that you're referring to? I hope you're not referring to Breonna Taylor, because we know she was not sleeping when she was shot. This pandering on black people is very, very nauseating. It's counterproductive. It spreads more fear mongering, right? And so again, come on, Biden. If you're gonna say it, be accurate, right? So this is a problem. See, you guys, listen. He says these things about black people, yet again, the things that the black community is asking for, he does not do anything about, right? It sounds good, right? He's a soothsayer. He says things that you want to hear. He tickle your ears. It's ear friendly. But it's not the truth, you guys. It's absolutely not the truth. And this is why we have the problem in our community now, because we're so satisfied with words. We're not satisfied with actions. It's the actions that are missing, the actions that are absent from the things that he says. Listen, it's been 2 years. He's just now about to sign an executive order in reference to segments of the George Floyd Policing Act, which some of them were actually really decent. This one in particular. Why did it take so long? If he cared that much about black people, you guys, he would have done a lot more, and he would have been a little bit more consistent. So this is, to me, honestly, it's very disrespectful what he just said. One would argue that this is, again, a part of the problem, that we are so easily moved by words and we're never focused on actions.
Members of Congress, including many here today, like Senator Cory Booker and Congressman Karen Bass. First, the executive order promotes accountability. It creates a new national law enforcement accountability database to track records of misconduct so that an officer can't hide the misconduct. It strengthens the pattern and practice investigation to address systematic misconduct in some departments.
That is necessary. I would definitely say that is necessary. Even if someone thinks it's not necessary, there's nothing wrong with having it, right? So I'm all for it. If you're a good officer, this isn't something that you have to worry about. If you're an officer that's trash, then this is something that's going to be a hindrance to you, right? If you're an officer that's not good at your job, this will also be a problem. And if you're an officer that constantly gets in trouble and is violating people's rights, this will also be a problem for you, which is a good problem for the citizens, because this is going to weed people out, and it'll also help with the liability issues that departments are facing. And I also think it should encourage citizens when they have an encounter with an officer who is a product of negative retention, meaning that departments refuse to fire them for whatever reason. It should increase their chances of being able to sue them, right? You've known you had a troublemaker, you know you had a problem, you had somebody who wasn't good at their job, who was a liability, and you did not remove them. I think this is a great idea. I love it. I say bring it.
It mandates all federal agents wear and activate body cameras while on patrol. Second, the executive order raises standards.
Now, let's be clear. You know, this is the federal government. They have federal powers. They can mandate all federal agents and law enforcement personnel under the federal umbrella to wear body cameras. They cannot do that on the state level, you guys. So let's be clear. He has absolute control over the federal government. He can make those type of statements and demands, and they have to do it, which federal agents should be wearing them as well, right? So again, they work for the people. They just work from the federal level. For the state now, how are you going to implement that? One, because you need the money and funding. For some states, say they claim they don't have the funding for it. I think there's a way where you can use the Constitution as leverage to say that as these are state employees, we need to see what they are doing, and every action that a state employee has on a citizen, it is important that we see that interaction, right? So I think there's a way they might be able to finesse it. Maybe not, I don't know. But regardless, every state officer, every state police officer should be required to and mandated to have a body camera on when they're interacting with the public.
Bans chokeholds, restricts no-knock warrants, tightens use of force policies to emphasize de-escalation and duty to intervene to stop another officer from using executive force, just as occurred. It didn't occur, but people testified it didn't occur.
All right, let's talk about this. People talk about chokeholds. You guys, it's irrelevant. I tell you what, if I'm in a situation, I'm choking somebody. It's just that simple. Banning chokeholds is not going to change anything. The issue is not the tool, it's the tool user. And again, this is all going to come down to training, better training, adequate training. Again, it's not the tool, it's the user. So banning chokeholds is not going to change anything, you guys. Banning no-knock warrants is not going to change anything. But because it's not going to change anything, I'm all for them implementing that. Because again, when we do search warrants, again, I knock on the door 3 times, I'm still going in anyways. So if anything you can destroy within a matter of 30 seconds, probably wasn't worth me having in the first place, right? So I get it, but at the end of the day, I say if the people want it, I say give it to the people. It doesn't put the officers in any more or less danger. So I say have at it. That's my thought on that. But chokeholds, I'm choking. And if my life's in danger, you're getting choked. And I don't have any other means to protect myself, or I've exhausted all the resources. I'm pretty sure the suspect will prefer being choked versus being shot. So you got to pick your poison.
Occurred in George Floyd's case. And third, the executive order modernizes policing. It calls for a fresh approach to recruit, train, promote, and retrain law enforcement that tied to advancing public safety and public trust. Right now, we don't.
All right. He says retrain law enforcement. Sounds good. Do you have a plan, though? Do you have a strategy? What does that look like? How do you implement that? I do. So I'm curious to know what he meant by that. And how do you plan on actually getting that done from a federal level? So this is interesting. Let's see what else he has to say. We're almost wrapping up.
We don't systematically collect data, for instance, on instances of police use of force. This executive order is going to improve that data collection. There's a lot more as well. The bottom line of the executive order includes reforms that have long been talked about or finally implemented at a federal level. And it comes at a critical time. By building trust, we can strengthen public safety, and we can more effectively fight crime in our communities. And we can do one more thing. We can show what's possible when we work together. Look, I know progress can be slow and frustrating. And there is a concern that the reckoning on race-inspired 2 years ago is beginning to fade. Signed, Advancing Executive Accountable Policing and Criminal Justice Practices to enhance public trust and public safety. And since I only have one pen, you're all going to get a copy of this. I don't have to do one stroke at a time with each pen.
There you have it, the standard brown nosing, as they like to call it. Well, there you have it. Just to recap real quick, let me just go over some of the key things on this executive order, and I want to get it more in detail. But for the most part, again, we have a National Registry of Officers fired for misconduct, encourages the state and local police to tighten up restrictions on chokeholds, tighten up. Again, they use this loose language. It doesn't mean anything because how do you implement that, right? Chokeholds and so-called no-knock warrants. You're either going to have them or not have them. It also restricts the transfer of military equipment to law enforcement agency. It mandates all federal agents to wear a body camera. Again, this is federal agents only. Again, I got to get the whole details of this executive order because I'm really, really curious. Other than that, I don't really see where there's going to be any major improvements, you guys. Listen, let me know your thoughts on this. I think this is a good step regardless. I think it's important that he is doing something. I think the database is a very, very high quality executive order. I think it's very important and I think it's necessary. So let me know your thoughts on that, you guys. Some steps are better than no steps. And it's been 2 years. It's been a lot going on, a lot of protesting, and this is what we got. Which is a lot of nothing for all the work that was put in and all the drama that ensued behind that. But nonetheless, here we are, you guys. Let me know your thoughts. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. And with that, good night. God bless.